From the mid-18th to mid-19th centuries, the Highland Clearances were responsible for the forced immigration of thousands of Scots to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, basically anywhere the British Crown might be looking to reinforce their claim on their colonies through settlement. Often, whole communities would cease to exist as their residents would all be forced to leave. In this video, I'm going to look at one small community that not only vanished, but the people in it seem to have vanished as well. It's a mystery that I was made aware of a few years back while looking to my family connections in the Hebrides. And though the story had nothing to do with my own family, it still intrigued and captivated my attention. And I want to bring you along as I begin my search. I don't know what I will find, but join me on my quest to try and find the descendants of Lorgill. One July day in 1830, on the Isle of Skye in the community of Lorgill, or it's sometimes called Lorgill, a gang made up of Lord Macdonald's factor, the sheriff and his men, and the local minister presented the following proclamation.
To all the crofters in Lorgill, take notice that you are hereby duly warned that you all be ready to leave Lorgill at 12 o'clock on the 4th of August next with all your baggage, but no stock, and proceed to Loch Snizort, where you will board the ship Midlothian that will take you to Nova Scotia, where you are to receive a free grant of land from Her Majesty's government. Take further notice that any crofter disobeying this order will be immediately arrested and taken to prison. All persons over 70 years of age and who have no relatives to look after them will be taken care of in the county poorhouse. This order is final and no appeal to the government will be considered. God save the Queen.
On the appointed day, the whole community obeyed the order, and after laying flowers on the graves of their loved ones, they sang the 100th Psalm and trudged away with much weeping. As was common during the clearances, the factor set the roof of their houses ablaze to prevent them from returning. Now it is recorded that the people of Lorgill were never again heard of on the Isle of Skye. And there's no record that I've been able to find of the ship Midlothian landing in Nova Scotia in 1830. So I have 4 possible theories. Number 1, they never left Skye. They simply went to other communities and lived with their fellow clansmen, assuming new identities. Number 2, their ship sank. Somewhere on the voyage across the Atlantic, wouldn't be unheard of. Number 3, they did land in Nova Scotia, but since their whole community was with them, their whole families, they had no reason to communicate back to anybody in Skye. Number 4 is that they never existed, and it's all just a myth. Some folklore, a fanciful story somebody made up representing a picture of all the clearances. So a little background to start with. The Isle of Skye is the largest and most northerly island in the Inner Hebrides. This group of islands is sometimes called the Western Isles of Scotland. Skye, like most of the Hebrides, was occupied in prehistoric times and settled by Gaelic-speaking Scots during the first few centuries BC. Norsemen ruled the islands from the 9th to 12th century AD, and though it was considered a part of Scotland after that, the Hebrides were controlled by the Lord of the Isles until the 15th century. The MacLeods were the chief clan on the Isle of Skye, and they built Donovan Castle, which you might have heard of. It was built in the 9th century, and it is still used today. In fact, it is the longest occupied home in all of Scotland. Now, at the time of the clearances, like much of the Highlands, the residents of the Isles were mostly tenant farmers, or as they were called, crofters. And they were relatively poor, and they owned no land. These crofters, who were the victims of the Highland clearances, make up a large majority of Scottish settlers in British overseas territories. Back to what happened to the crofters of Lorgill. I'm going to try to use the resources and tools that I have at hand that I would use to try to locate ancestors in my own family tree or in somebody else's. One of the first things I did in my research is to look to see if I could find a passenger list or any type of other record of the ship Midlothian leaving Uig. I hope I'm saying that right. It's the major port of Loch Snizort. So I'm looking at the period of early August of 1830, and then I also looked to see if I could find anything arriving in Nova Scotia later in the month of August into September and even into early October. To do this, I've used one of the simplest tools that genealogists have, which also happens to be one of the most overlooked that genealogists don't generally go to, or not at first. And that's simply Google. And really, I couldn't find much from the search results that did come up. I also used one of my favorite tools for finding information about immigration. It's called the Ships List, and it's at simply theshipslist.com. While I didn't find the ship, I did find this entry about immigrants to Cape Breton from the Isle of Skye in 1830. This was written in June, and it was talking about some upcoming arrivals. And it talks about 49 families coming from Skye. There's no names of communities they're coming from, no names of the ship or ships, because it's possible there could have been more than one. So that wasn't necessarily the group I'm looking for. I don't know. So I'm just going to kind of mark this and put it away in my memory and write it down in my notes so I know to come back to this. Another resource I've used in the past when looking into Scottish immigration records is simply called the Scottish Immigration Database. It's hosted by the University of Aberdeen, and it gives a list of people and the ships that they left on. So unfortunately, the records only cover the years from 1890 to 1860. So in this case, it was of no use. Now, from my searches on Google, I also came across this website here. Now, it has a passenger list for the Midlothian making a journey from Skye to Sydney. Unfortunately, it's not Sydney, Nova Scotia, but rather Sydney, Australia. And it also happened in August of 1837, not August of 1830. But it was captained by the same Captain Morrison that I've been able to find referred to as the captain of this ship in 1830. So almost immediately I was able to strike off theory 2, that the ship was wrecked in 1830, since there was a record of both the ship and the captain 7 years later. So I knew they still existed. I'm going to note this site and refer to it later if I need to. Looking at the theories I have left, number 1 is they never left Skye. Number 2, which we just ruled out, was that there was a shipwreck, so they died and weren't heard of. Number 3 is they settled in Nova Scotia and had no reason to write back. Number 4 was that it's a myth, it's made up. So I'm going to actually start at number 4. The reason I'm starting with theory number 4 is if I can prove that the story is real and the people and community of Lorgill are real, I've not only eliminated theory number 4, that it's false, but hopefully from doing this research, I'll be able to get some names of people, and that will help me narrow it down further. So if you were to look at Google Maps or other maps of the Isle of Skye, today you're not going to find a community called Lorgill. You will find the Lorgill River, and along that river there's a small valley where you will find the remains of approximately a dozen houses, 21 other buildings, and 10 small enclosures. According to Alexander Mackenzie, who wrote in 1883 a book about the clearances and the Isle of Skye, where he talked and interviewed people to get their accounts of different things. Now, in this book, he records that the Township of Lorgill, or Lorgill, as again he refers to it, and from my research, it does seem to be the same place. I've seen it used interchangeably. The township was originally organized to house 7 crofters, and their annual rent was to be £40 a year. And this was to be paid to Lord MacDonald, who was the ruling lord of the area. Now, in these interviews, one of the person also stated that Lord MacDonald and his factor seemed like they never rested until they became possessed of all the land. They were already in possession of them, in the sense they owned them, but they had these tenement farmers who had been there for centuries that were essentially part of their clan. The reason they wanted to get rid of them, well, they thought they could make more than £40 a year by bringing sheep to pasture and basically turning it into pasture land. They saw it as a much more valuable commodity than their own kinsmen. In this book, the person that's relaying this story, the account about Factor and the Lord wanting to possess the lands, specifically mentions not only himself, who was elsewhere, but he mentions the people of Lorgill and how they were cleared. So the archaeological evidence, the ruins, show us that there were homes there. There was croft homes, stone homes. There's you can still see partially today. In Alexander Mackenzie's books, we have witnesses' account of the people of Lorgill, and we have an account of how their crofting township was set up, including rents. So I would say that the event was fact, not fictional. So let's get rid of theory 4. Now we are left with the question, who were these evictees that bravely sang Psalm 100, which is a psalm of praise to God? So today, hiking in the Lorgill Valley is actually a popular destination. In my search for Lorgill, that's one of the first things that came up was a lot of blogs of people who have hiked in the Lorgill Valley, or actual specific tours around hiking in the Lorgill Valley. Walking from the site of the ruins in the Lorgill Valley to Ig on Loch Snizort, it's basically a long day's walk for a fit and healthy person. And after taking what little possessions they had and carrying it with them, they thinking that they're going to a place that they were going to be loaded onto a ship and dropped in the middle of a place they didn't know. This must have been disheartening. In fact, even knowing they were going on a ship to be sent across to North America, because it said that the ships that transported these evictees were just as overcrowded and unsanitary as the slave ships at the time. The only thing is, unlike the slave ships, there was no regulations governing the transport of these people. And while the evictions were carried out by landowners who were often the crofters' own clan chiefs, they were done as the Lorgill notice demonstrates, with the full authority of the government. But yet they remained faithful and grateful and continued to praise God. So who were these people? And where did they wind up? And are any of their descendants still living today? That's to come. While you're waiting for part 2 of what happened to the crofters of Lorgill, click on this video right here to hear another story of a family that arrived in Nova Scotia because of the clearances.